Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the 25th webinar in the Framing the Future series. My name is Gary Allen, and I'm the president of the Maryland Forestry Foundation, and we're very pleased to present this continuing series of webinars about issues, programs, and projects which we believe will frame the future of forestry in Maryland. We welcome you today and to today's topic, which we think is another one of those that will resonate in the future quite a bit in light of the 5 million tree initiative begun just a little over a year ago. We're still gearing up for that program across multiple agencies. So welcome today about how we're going to look at the resources that may be available in various areas to help address that goal that the state has set. Today's moderator, as always, is a former Mel Fellow. That's Megan Carr. Megan, introduce our panel.
Great. Yeah. So just a couple quick reminders for our audience in terms of housekeeping. Throughout the discussion, you are more than welcome to ask some questions to our panelists for them to answer at the end of our session. And for that, there is a Q&A chat box function for most folks that'll appear at the bottom of your Zoom window. So please enter those questions as they come to mind, and we will have our speakers address them. And as Gary mentioned, we are discussing things related to the 5 Million Tree Program and other planting initiatives at the state, regional, and national level. A lot of large-scale tree planting programs have become key components for many sustainability and climate resilience programs. And implementing initiatives like Maryland's 5 Million Tree Program are going to pose significant challenges, including planning, logistics, coordinating a wide range of partnerships, tracking plantings to ensure requirements are being met. But at a very fundamental level, none of this is going to be possible without supplying the very trees that are going to be planted for both this and other initiatives, as well as ongoing restoration and afforestation programs for numerous agencies, including ongoing planting programs. And so our question for this month and potentially for future sessions as well is, how are the demands for this tree supply going to be met for current and future initiatives? So this month we're joined by leaders from 2 projects seeking to ensure supplies of resilient native trees to meet the needs of future forests. First up, we're joined by Ashley Trout, who is the Senior Advisor for the Greater Baltimore Wilderness Coalition, where he works to unite regional partners around creating a thriving, resilient, and equitable green infrastructure network throughout Central Maryland. Ashley also runs Gaia Scene Services, which is an environmental consulting firm that specializes in site-scale, nature-based, and renewable energy solutions. Prior to these roles, Ashley served as Senior Program Manager for Innovative Stormwater Management projects at Blue Water Baltimore, where he developed and led programs focused on community-wide stormwater reduction strategies and oversaw the design and construction of capital stormwater projects. Ashley has a master's degree in wildlife ecology and conservation from the University of Florida and is a graduate of the Maryland Climate Leadership Academy. So thanks, Ashley. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Megan. I'll hopefully have the same luck we had earlier getting my screen shared. Okay, you guys seeing that all right?
Looks great.
Terrific. So thanks so much for having me again. My name is Ashley Trout. I'm Senior Advisor for the Greater Baltimore Wilderness Coalition. And it's my pleasure to share with you a brand new initiative of the coalition that we're calling Gather and Grow. Let's see if we can successfully advance. We cannot. 1 second here. There we go. So for those of you who haven't heard of our coalition, Megan mentioned, we're an inclusive network of partners co-leading transformational nature-based solutions across Central Maryland. And there's a map of the original territory that we targeted to work on and identify all of the green infrastructure, existing green infrastructure, and what we believe potential green infrastructure throughout Central Maryland. And that map was developed back in 2015. And we have been steadily growing the coalition and refining our strategies ever since then. So I am delighted to say that we are now about 60 members strong. We represent quite a wide range of partners, federal, state, local government, lots of NGOs and academic partners who all share this goal of creating this really robust, resilient, and equitable green infrastructure network throughout Central Maryland. So back in 2020, relying on that original map that we created, that original map, one of the top priorities that we saw was expanding tree canopy throughout our region as a way to create increased resilience. So in 2020, we were lucky enough to secure a grant from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation with the goal of trying to triple the rate of tree planting throughout our region. We called that initiative Planting the Future. We're still working on that initiative. But as we all know, shortly after that, along came this real doozy of an opportunity with 5 million trees for Maryland. The Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021, which calls for planting of 5 million trees through by 2031, is it, I think? So with the arrival of that, with the work that we were already doing, we convened a series of tree summits with as many partners as we could think of to sort of do the same thing that we're talking about right now through this webinar. Like, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities to getting this work done in a timely manner? Two things that really rose to the top for us that we heard from our partners was, one, we need a lot more people who are properly trained out there planting trees. So a great increase in green workforce. And two, we need to start focusing on supply. We heard from a lot of partners, yeah, our resources are going to get trained really quickly at our local nurseries. So we need to start thinking about that. So we set our minds to thinking about those two issues and how the coalition could play a role in addressing them. Pardon me. So just last year, we secured another National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that allowed us to create what we're calling the Maryland Climate Crew Network. It's a network of green workforce development hubs throughout Central Maryland, some of which were already in existence, some were propping up as new, some a lot of experience already in green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, others who've been doing really great work with workforce development in general, but we're new to the greening side of things. So we're focusing on restoration and resilience work, specifically in under-resourced communities, while providing under and unemployed individuals from those communities with robust, multifaceted green job training, field experience, and industry exposure. We felt it was really important to be addressing issues outlined in all the current federal legislation, all the state legislation, that we want to be doing this work in our frontline communities, not just doing the work there, but actually hiring from those same communities where we are seeing a fair amount of unemployment. We are now coming up on the end of our first cohort, our first fall season, and I'm thrilled to say that it's been going really well with the 3 hubs that I show here. Then along comes the grant that probably everyone on this webinar applied for, the huge IRA Urban and Community Forestry grant opportunity. We were super excited about this opportunity. We wanted to see, what were the next steps we could take with our Climate Crew Network, and also start getting into the other side, the production side of things. So Chesapeake Conservancy approached us. They had a really great idea. They were doing a lot of good workforce development in Pennsylvania and had a really good live stake program up there. And they were wondering, could they work with our workforce development initiative, become part of that, and maybe could we transfer up what we're just getting started in the way of seed collection and put that under one initiative. So this is a very simple schematic of what that looks like. The Live State Collaborative from Pennsylvania, we're using Tomorrow's Trees, the Tomorrow's Trees program from Potomac Conservancy, which is a great model of seed collection, we feel like, and then applying our Climate Crew network to help gather the seeds and the live stakes and to plant them and to grow them, while also doing a large component of volunteer engagement with this, because while everyone loves planting trees, it turns out it's even more fun to get hundreds of people out there collecting seeds and doing live stake work. So we called it Gather and Grow. And our main purpose that we proposed was to accelerate nature-based restoration efforts and environmental equity by using an impact network approach, which is the same one that we're using in general with the Greater Baltimore Wilderness Coalition, to grow and transfer existing models of successful GI planning, workforce development, and conservation implementation in Pennsylvania and Maryland to meet the goals of the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Plan and resiliency efforts. We are thrilled to say that we were awarded funding for this initiative. Not full funding, but enough to make us really happy and really get some good energy started. Under the Gather and Grow, there were sort of three primary areas we proposed to focus on: urban and community forest planning, workforce development, obviously, and conservation and maintenance. And that's, for the sake of this webinar, the one I want to go into a little bit more detail on. In the initial proposal, we talked about planting 1,000 trees in urban areas, 10,500 trees planted in riparian forest buffers, 4,000 planted on public and private property by workforce development teams, 100 acres of tree planting maintained, 140,000 live stakes collected and planted, and 10,000 pounds of seed mast, 10 acres of impervious surface treated by GI practices, and 4 micro nurseries or / grow out stations, which is another area that we heard from a lot of partners a real interest in, and it's a model that we're really curious to explore. These were the original goals. Like I said, our funding, they gave us about half of what we asked for. So take some of these numbers and cut them in half, and you'll have a better idea of what we hope to accomplish in the next 5 years. We received $2 million over the next 5 years, or we will be rather. Lot of ambitious goals that we've set for ourselves, but we have, let's see here, maybe the next slide will show, we've got the beginning of a fantastic coalition of partners working on this. And while I'm excited about the work itself, the thing that really gets me excited every day when I wake up is the partners that I get to work with. That's how I found over the past 4 years now leading Greater Baltimore Wilderness Coalition, that's where the real impact happens. People coming together, shared goals, really strong trust-based relationships, effective communication, working towards this much larger goal together. It's really exciting with everyone bringing their own ideas, their own capacity, and sharing what they can. And it's a delight to wake up every day and work with all these partners and to think about what's possible as we go forward. So I want to keep my presentation short and sweet because I love answering questions more than just yammering on. So I'm going to stop it there. Please reach out to me with any questions. And specifically, if you have ideas and ways to grow our very young initiative.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. So yes, again, for folks who might have joined after we gave the housekeeping notes, please do enter your questions into the Q&A function. We have the option to either answer those via text, but I think we'll have plenty of time for discussion later. So we may want to save those for the Q&A time at the end of our session. And that way folks watching the recordings later on will be able to learn from those Q&A discussions as well. Speaking of the recordings, we did have a question pop up about when the recordings and where they'll be available. The Maryland Forestry Foundation website is currently under reconstruction. As soon as we have a firm launch date for availability on previous webinars, we will send that announcement out with our monthly email blasts with the registration and session topics for these discussions. So if you're not on that email list, please do feel free to reach out to us to make sure that you're added to that. But we will go ahead and move on to our next speaker, who is Rich Hallett. Dr. Hallett started his career in forestry on Prince of Wales Island in the Tongass National Forest, worked as a regeneration forester for Mead Paper on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, logging in the winter, was woodlands manager for the University of New Hampshire while obtaining his master's degree, and finally obtained a PhD in natural resources in 1996. He has spent his scientific career studying tree and forest health in the northeastern US, first conducting regional scale studies across the Allegheny, Green Mountain, and White Mountain National Forests. In 2010, he joined the NYC Urban Field Station and began to study urban ecosystems, where he brings lessons learned from studying rural forest management to urban ecology. Currently, he's working with a team to adapt silvicultural practices to urban forested natural areas in the northeastern US. He also works to establish a dialogue between urban and rural forest management professionals, and we're very happy to be joined today by Dr. Rich Hallett. So I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me. I will try to share my screen here. How does that look?
Looks great.
Okay, excellent. As Ashley said, I have a background in rural forestry and then more recently in urban forestry. And the shift has been really interesting. And I've been able to take some of what I've learned out in rural forests and bring them to urban. But I've also come to realize that our urban forest practitioners have a lot of knowledge that they can share with some of the things that our rural forests will be facing in the future, especially with respect to climate change. In our cities, of course, we're already warmer. And so this presents an opportunity for people like myself who focuses on research to take advantage of this phenomenon and begin to think about how we can manage forests in general. As Ashley said, we're faced with an opportunity here where we're getting a lot of funding to plant lots of trees. But we face some challenges, especially in our urban settings. And so I want to focus on an urban forest type, forested natural areas in cities. So a lot of my work is really focused on how to manage forests in cities, and also, as Ashley mentioned, bringing silviculture into the city, even though, of course, we're not harvesting trees for the economy. We're trying to grow good trees fast so they can give us the benefits of the ecosystem services they provide. So most of my comments today will be most relevant to the urban forested natural areas within the cities. And so some of the challenges we face in our natural areas are that when there's a gap created, this is not an opportunity for natural regeneration to occur. It's more a beachhead for invasion for our exotic invasive plant species that prevents regeneration. And I apologize for the construction noise in the background. Also, when we think about our urban forests and opportunities for creating new canopy, some of our opportunities are what I call afforestation, or where we create forests in cities. This site is a construction fill about 20 feet deep in Philadelphia, and yet it represents an opportunity to increase the canopy if we can get trees to grow there. And then, of course, I mentioned the changing climate. And here's a map of what the climate in Baltimore will be like in 60 years. And so you can see the arrow moving from Mississippi up into the Baltimore area. And if you think about it, when we plant a tree today, it's very likely, or we at least hope it will be alive in 60 years. And so what will the climate be like? And then what strategies do we need to adopt as we think about the future in our urban settings and our urban forests? And so thinking about this and thinking about native versus non-native trees, and I'd like to make a provocative argument that in urban settings, no tree is native. The reason I say this is that the urban environment is not like the environment trees grew to evolve to grow in. If you think about it, as I mentioned, we're already warmer in the urban areas, but we also have a different chemical environment. Atmospheric and soil chemistry is different, and this creates challenges for any tree growing in our cities. So some possible strategies I've been thinking about, and we've been doing some research on recently, are thinking about bringing native tree species, but collecting seeds from southern seed zones and moving them north. Easier propagation. Ashley mentioned the live staking program, and we've been experimenting with willows and poplars in this realm. And then species migration, so taking species that aren't within their native range and moving them north. And then what I'm calling new old species with large native ranges. And in particular, we've been experimenting with disease-resistant American elm and American chestnut. And I'll talk about each of these as examples here. But before I move into that, I want to talk about, and Ashley alluded to this as well, is that partnerships are critical to this work. And being in the Forest Service and moving into urban environments, of course, we don't have a national forest where we manage the land. We're working with our partners, our urban forest management partners, Baltimore Parks Department, Philadelphia Parks Department. And as you can see on this map, we formed what we call the Northeast Urban Silviculture Network, where we could establish a dialogue between management practitioners in each of the cities that you see on this map, also involving university scientists and experts in both urban and rural silviculture from the universities you see here. And then the U.S. Forest Service has field stations in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, and Springfield, Massachusetts. And so just when COVID struck, we convened this group and set up a series of webinars like this, where we had some conversations about the problems that we're facing in keeping our urban forest and natural areas sustainable and managing them in our cities. And we came up with some ideas based upon real world problems that our forest management professionals were dealing with, and then some interesting scientific questions that our scientists would be interested in exploring. And so what we did is we created a climate adapted oak silviculture project, and we engaged our network to collect acorns from 6 seed zones. So we collected about 100,000 acorns. And the central question here is, do southern provenances of white oak and chestnut oak outperform local genotypes and or safeguard against climate change to sustain mass species in our urban forests? And so we collected acorns from as far north as Springfield, Massachusetts, and then as far south as Kentucky and Tennessee. And so we did this in fall of 2021, and we were lucky enough to find a collaborator, a white oak geneticist, who was also setting up some studies. And she was willing to plant our acorns, both the white oak and the chestnut oak, in the nursery in Western Kentucky. We grew them for 1 year, and then we lifted the bare root seedlings in early 2022, and early 2023, actually. And we transported about 18,000 of these bare root seedlings north, so we could plant into a full reciprocal design study in 4 of our partner cities. And so working from the south to north, we planted trees in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New Haven, and Springfield, Massachusetts. We planted these trees into gaps in forested natural areas in each of these cities. Each city had 5 gaps of white oak and 5 gaps of chestnut oak planted. And every single city got representatives from every single seed zone. So we're moving plants from the north, south, and from the south, north. And we're following each of these trees to determine whether moving provenance from the south to the north can help us for the future climate. As of this fall, we measured all 9,000 trees that we planted across this region, and we have about 99% survival so far. And we're looking forward to collecting data into the future as well. I'll also say that each of these studies are long-term studies, and so we're looking at keeping these going for the next couple of decades because trees take a while to grow. So moving on from the oaks, really thinking about willows and poplars, and working with some of my colleagues who are experts in phytoremediation and using willows and poplars to clean contaminated sites. I realized that these trees were very easy to propagate and grow, and they could have some applications in urban settings, in particular because they're super fast growing. And so we've been experimenting with that, these two species in particular. And here you see we live stake some of these willows and poplars into pots at our project at Still Meadow Peace Park in Baltimore. And in addition, we've set up a stool bed in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Parks Department. And so you can see preparing our stool bed with weed block. We planted our cuttings, keeping track of each genotype into the stool bed. And you can see 1 year after planting, and then 2 years after planting, we were able to harvest about 10,000 cuttings that could go into our studies. And since then, the Philadelphia Parks Department has been experimenting with using these in their restoration sites as well. In fact, just yesterday, I was out with the Parks Department, and they had potted some cuttings this spring into 3-gallon pots and planted them this fall, and they were 9 feet tall after seasons of growth. And so I mentioned they're easy to propagate. We've been experimenting with not only live staking, putting them in pots, but also bullet planters to test, how easy can we make it? So the live staking is simply putting the cutting in the ground like you see on the left. And we've experimented with this at Still Meadow in Baltimore, and then also comparing to those live stakes to putting them in pots and growing them for a year. And then moving on to thinking about the species migration. And so what I talked about before with the oaks, we're taking native species and moving the provenance north. But what about moving species that aren't within their native range from the south to the north? We're collaborating with the Philadelphia Parks Department to explore this. And about 6 years ago, they planted both loblolly pine and southern red oak into a restoration project in Haddington Woods in Philadelphia. And I was out there yesterday, and the loblollies are about 25 to 30 feet tall. They're producing pine cones, and there's actually some regeneration occurring for the loblolly pines. This is can be a little bit controversial because people start to get a little nervous when we start moving species around, and for good reason. But in our case, when we're doing research, we can do things on a small scale where we're measuring and tracking every single tree. And if we see that it might be becoming a problem, we haven't planted hundreds of acres of it. It's usually a few small research plots, and we can mitigate any risk that may be occurring. And then lastly, I mentioned our work with the chestnuts, hybrid chestnuts that are disease resistant. The American Chestnut Foundation has worked with us. Our oldest study is with the New York Restoration Project in Highbridge Park. And you can see where we have planted some of our chestnuts into an urban setting. And I just got this graph yesterday from my colleague Jason Smith, who's giving a talk tomorrow. And he worked up these numbers showing our trees. We planted black oak, chestnut, and white pine into plots at Highbridge Park. And you can see the relative growth rates, and the chestnut seems to be growing very well. I will stress that these are disease resistant. So we have noticed the chestnut blight impacting some of these trees. But again, we're tracking each genotype separately and giving the information back to the American Chestnut Foundation so they can continue to track and work with their different provenances. And so, like Ashley said, love to take any questions. And we're really here to think about sort of pushing the envelope on some of this work and figuring out how to make things easier, or how to prepare and study for a changing climate into the future in our urban forests. And I will leave it there, and thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Rich. So for our audience members, please do drop your questions into the Q&A box, and we will be more than happy to get that discussion going. I guess while we wait for folks to start adding those, I would be curious, Ashley, if you'd like to elaborate maybe a little bit on some of the seed collection and live stake strategies that your group has been taking on. Which groups you're working with and what species you've been targeting so far.
Sure, happy to. Like I said, very early stages for the seed collection. We actually just did some soft pilot tests this fall. We focused mostly on white oak seed collection. And same time we're doing that, we're building up a network of partners who could take them and grow them out. So strong relationship with Maryland State Nursery. That's where a lot of our product is going. But we're also talking with private nurseries. They're really excited about this. I mean, sure, you could say they could make a lot of money doing this, but so far they're more excited about the collaborative effort of seeing what's going to work well and being able to get their hands on local genotypes and teach people about what they're doing. So, for example, we had our workforce development crew in Baltimore collect maybe 10 gallons of white oak acorns, and then they went up to our partners Ecotone, their nursery up in Baltimore County, and learned about the nursery industry and how everything works, whether or not they might want a job doing that kind of work. And then they spent the afternoon potting up all the acorns that they had collected. We're certainly quickly finding out, well, there's some logistical details about this, right? When you're working with a private partner, Baltimore City was sort of quick to raise their hand and say, oh, we're not quite sure yet about collecting on our park property and then giving it over to a private grower. So there's a lot of logistics that we still need to work out. And we haven't yet started any of the live stake collection down here, but same issues will apply. Where can we collect? Who's allowed to grow it out if we want to go that route? And then working with our partners to identify where can we actually plant these live cuttings. But I want to go back to what Rich was saying. We are very focused on, I mean, one of the big reasons we're doing this is so that we know we've got native genotypes that we're working with. But we actually worked with Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science last year, and they developed a one-pager for us on what species we should be focusing on that will have the greatest climate and heat resilience going forward. So that'll be a lot of what guides our collection efforts going forward as well.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I guess a thing that of course popped out to me, Rich, earlier in your discussion, in urban settings, no tree is native. Very provocative indeed. So something I think I'm going to be chewing on a bit. So I guess with that in mind, would you like to elaborate any further on how that's kind of influenced your approach to some of these, assisted range migration kind of programs?
Yeah, and I agree, Megan. I've been thinking a lot about this as well as I become more familiar with urban environments. And so I will say I'm not sure that that's entirely true, but the urban environment does have some special challenges, and if not unique to as compared to rural, I think they combine, some of the factors combine and are exacerbated in unique ways. And so, yes, we have invasive species in rural settings, and yes, we do have heavy metals in some rural settings, but in our urban environments, all of those things are true. And so it presents some challenges to think about, okay, if we want trees to grow, and we certainly do, what's the best approach? And then also thinking about the long-lived nature of these trees. The climate is already different, and is, according to all the models, it's going to be increasingly different in the future. And if we want a sustainable forest, we need to be thinking a little bit outside of the box. Our project with the oaks developed out of a sensitivity towards some of our partners would just not allow any non-native tree to be planted in their city, right? And so we pushed the envelope a little bit and said, well, what about if we collected acorns from Kentucky for white oaks, which are growing here? How would that be? And so that's been pretty palatable, I think, mostly from the standpoint, as I mentioned before, we're doing it as a research project. And so it's not hundreds of acres, it's not operational, and we're following them very closely. So we just haven't spread them willy-nilly across the landscape. And I think that's the advantage of being a research scientist as opposed to someone that just needs to get trees in the ground, plant 5 million trees, for instance. And so what I'm hoping is this information and our ability to follow these different species over time in our different cities, like Philadelphia planted the loblolly and southern red oak. That information could be useful to our friends in New York City who don't want non-native trees planted in their forests yet. And so hopefully we can inform this by pushing the envelope with some experiments in thoughtful ways and in ways that are very controlled.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you also mentioned some of the translating some of these questions between the urban and the rural side of things. One of the other things that really stood out to me during your discussion was I think that the conventional thinking on the knowledge flow between urban and rural forestry has been that we have such a robust set of knowledge developed in rural systems and that we need to learn to translate them to the urban. But it sounds like you've been thinking about inverting that. So wondered if you'd like to touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. And so I came out of the rural forestry background, rural forest managed, very classical silvicultural practices. And we've been studying silviculture in this country for over 100 years. We have long-term experimental forests in the White Mountains where we have over 50 years of continuous data collection on these forests, and they're managed, unmanaged. Hubbard Brook is very famous. So yes, there is a lot of expertise that can be brought to bear on managing our forests in cities. But what I'm learning is that, in the White Mountain National Forest, we don't have Japanese knotweed yet, or it's not there very much. Mile a minute is moving north. Our urban forest practitioners are becoming experts at dealing with these problems that our rural forest practitioners will be facing in the future. And so that's why I've been trying to establish a dialogue between the experts on both sides. I feel like we're at a disadvantage because people think of urban as something other. And I don't think it is. I think it's part of a continuum, and we are experiencing climate change in urban settings now that our rural settings won't experience for a few decades. This is an opportunity for us to try some things, learn some things, and begin to transfer knowledge in both directions. And so I've been really pushing that. It's a little hard for me to get my rural colleagues to see themselves as being part of the knowledge base for urban settings, because just like me before I came to the New York City Urban Field Station, I thought it was either street trees or Central Park. And that's just not so, as we all know now. There are actually old growth forests in New York City, in Baltimore, in Philadelphia. And I believe our urban areas are probably some of the best refugia for old growth forests in this country. And so, yeah, I think there are opportunities here that are largely untapped as of yet.
Right, yeah, and Ashley, I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in as well on any of the above. Given that the Greater Baltimore Wilderness Coalition, of course, the focus kind of starts in a fairly urbanized zone, but you don't have to go very far outside 695 to start hitting, some pretty intact forested areas.
Yeah, it's Rich really got me thinking about this more than I have in a while. Should we really be focusing on early successional species like, urban habitats are just it's constant disturbance, if you will. So do we need species that can withstand heat and drought, but more just anything you can throw at them? And what suite will be serving us best for the long term? I also I really like to think about co-benefits. So finding those species that will provide the maximum co-benefits, not just carbon sequestration, but also insect biodiversity, and pollinator benefits, cooling. It's complicated, and as one of these folks helping all the practitioners out there and really excited about 5 million trees, it's easy to just get out there and let's just plant. What trees are available, let's just plant and hope for the best. Let's just plant and hope for the best. But it's so valuable to have partners like U.S. Forest Service and others doing really sound research and remembering to reach out to them on a regular basis and say, hey guys, what are you seeing? What's working? And then also working with our growers, say, hey, here's what we're hearing from the scientists. This is what we need. Can you provide that?
And so speaking of partnerships, I do want to touch on Carol's question in the Q&A chat, where she asks, Prince George's County Department of the Environment and the University of Maryland want to partner on some hydroponic growing to speed up tree supplies, and whether that would be something of interest to the programs being discussed today. So is that an approach that either of you have considered before?
No, that's a new one for me. And yeah, being a research scientist, I'd be very interested to talk more and think about how we can maybe set up some research studies or help in some way. So yeah, I'd be very open to learning more about that. But I will say I have no expertise in hydroponics. I know what it is. Haven't thought about it in the context of the tree supply problem.
I'd say the same on my end, but I will note that I know a number of schools that have, nascent hydroponic projects. And if there is a way to be doing accelerated tree growth with them, that could be a really fun science opportunity.
Megan, may I ask a question?
Of course, please.
Sure. First, I want to thank both of you for your expertise and experience and the work you're doing. I find it not only fascinating, but really challenging. And really, I'm really pleased to see the on-the-ground work that Leslie's group is carrying out in cooperation with a variety of partners in urban areas in the Baltimore, Washington area. In the case of Rich, I was just going to ask you, if you don't mind, a couple questions. Your work is absolutely fascinating about the impacts of climate change on urban areas and looking at the different geotypes from more southern areas and how they might work in more northern areas. So my question is, what about communities that are interested not only in finding out about the ongoing content of your work, but ultimately participating in it in some more southern communities? I noticed you kind of stopped at Baltimore, and obviously we draw out of Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. and the broader Washington metropolitan area, and obviously further to the west in Maryland and the Eastern Shore. So for smaller communities, not the major urban areas like New York and Baltimore, but for areas that have populations of maybe 50,000 or to 60,000 as opposed to hundreds of thousands, do you see participation from these communities that are equally interested in finding out what you're doing and what its implications are, I think?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of questions like that about how can people become involved in our research. And in the cities that we're working in, our best opportunity right now, we're thinking is we're really interested in the phenology of these different provenances, and that requires a pretty intensive like weekly look at every single tree. And so we're coming up with ways where we can engage folks in that. But I think to your broader question, Gary, you know, can other communities participate? We're stretched pretty thin, even with the 4 cities we did. But we've got some lessons learned. We obviously, I didn't really talk about this, but anytime you plant a tree in a city, you have to protect it from the deer. So we came up with some techniques to put up temporary fencing around the gaps that we planted, which after one growing season seems to be working very well. We had no deer browse on our trees. And then, you know, just how to set those up. And I think, you know, if there were cities and someone to help us partner on the tech transfer piece, we could provide a lot of information that could allow people to, you know, set up their own gap plantings. You know, maybe not, you know, as part of a major research project, but I think that there's some opportunities for on the applied side for doing this in our urban forested natural areas, and we'd be happy to transfer that information wherever possible.
Well, I'd like to follow it. You know, your comments, both of your comments, raise in my mind 2 other issues that I get a lot of questions about on our work here in Maryland. And let me just highlight those questions for you. One is the issue you both talked about just in a moment, which is the bridges between urban and rural forestry and the differences in that, which raises the question not merely of how these 2 both traditional and more cutting edge type forestry in light of climate change are differentiating, but how urban forestry is different as a future job opportunity from traditional forestry, and how we would actually define those differences if we want to begin to make it a more emerging profession in the future, so that we're beginning to recruit beyond simply the tree care industry, which is where most of the professionals operating in this area have come from. So if you have some insights into that and plant some seeds, I will say to the larger audience, we're going to be exploring both of these questions about differences and content in 2024 in much more detail. But I would appreciate your insight into it and basically the experience that you've encountered, Rich, because it sounds like you've bridged both of them and Ashley's working in both of them.
Yeah, Megan knows that we had a pilot program this summer in Baltimore, an urban silviculture training program. We had 5 young men from the Still Meadow Community Church area, and we did a training session this summer teaching them the skills. We're not duplicating the arborist certification skills. That's an individual tree by tree basis. But to your point, there is a gap. When we started to work at Still Meadow and we tried to find someone to fell the hazardous ash trees that had died from emerald ash borer, we couldn't pay anyone to do it. I had to go get my chainsaw certification from the Forest Service, and I did the work. And so that sort of, I had an epiphany right there. Is like, wait a minute, there are people right here in this community that want jobs. We can't hire anyone to do this. Maybe we should start a training program. And so I believe 4 out of the 5 of our trainees this summer are now working either in school for urban forestry or working in the urban forestry profession right now. And they've got a unique set of training background now, because we not only train them in how to plant trees, but how to put up deer fences in forested natural areas, how to use compasses, how to survey areas, how to identify exotic invasive plant species. And we involve them in some of our data collection on some of our studies. So this doesn't exist yet. We're developing the materials to support that curriculum, and the Still Meadow Community Church received $2 million from the Forest Service grant program to expand this effort and job training program next year as well. So yes, it's a big gap. Our other cities are very interested, all the way from the job training programs for people that were previously justice involved. And again, there's a need for this because our forested natural areas in our cities are undermanaged, and they lack. People are starting to realize that they haven't been paying attention to them because everyone thinks a forest will just grow once it's established. But there are some real threats that we're facing from emerald ash borer, beech leaf disease, and people are starting to wake up and realize that if we want to maintain this canopy in our cities, we need to be a little more proactive. And I think that there will be more jobs in the future in this realm, and we need to figure out how to train people to do it.
Amen. And Ashley, if you'd like to comment on your job stuff, it sounds like Rich just outlined a project opportunity for you to work with him.
I'm already chatting with the Still Meadow folks, and we are closely aligned. Let's merge efforts here and see what we can come up with. I will say that our workforce development program so far, we've tailored maybe with a slightly wider lens. I would say, like, we're trying to educate folks on climate careers writ large, giving them light exposure to a number of different opportunities. But the bulk of their field work is focused on hitting 5 million tree goals. So I have them out there planting every day possible. The fact of the matter is this isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, right? Especially as it gets hotter and hotter out there. This is hard work. But it's for the people who do find it challenging and interesting, we consider it a tremendous opportunity, and a lot of the data out there does show that this is a big growth sector, no pun intended. So we're looking forward, and we're also hearing it, I should say, from the industry partners, and that's an important part of any good workforce development program, right? You've got to have your industry partners lined up from the beginning, saying, yes, we need these people. Here's what we need them to come out of the training program with knowledge about. And yes, we will hire them if they're properly trained. We're hearing that from a lot of partners out there. And I would say, again, like, we see a shift with a number of these industry partners from maybe just straight arboriculture, silviculture to restoration ecology. They want people that really understand the complexity of all this work, not just right tree, right place, but thinking more holistically about the landscape and what's going to work and not work. So it's going to require a lot of us really rethinking and working together on the educational components of this, in addition to the realities of working with traditionally underserved communities that have just real life needs that aren't being met, and meeting them where they are as we're trying to get them established in this field.
And I was hoping that you both could touch on very briefly on the age ranges of your workforce development trainees and how they were recruited.
Well, for our program, we worked with the Still Meadow Community Fellowship, and they identified the young people that would take part in this pilot, and they were, we did have a lot of discussions about like what age groups to work with, and for liability reasons, we focused on, adults, so over 18. So our age range was, I think, 18 to 21 or 22 for this cohort. I think there are opportunities for, Still Meadow involves all age ranges in, some of their, forest school they have there. And in my work, I've worked with, high school students on up. And I find there's a huge amount of interest in the natural environment, even amongst people that live exclusively in cities. And when I start working, I've done some citizen science work. And when I start doing some training on different methods, I constantly get questions about, this is amazing. Can we get paid to do this? And that tells me that, yeah, there is an appetite for this, even if you have only grown up in a city. And people get excited about this. Young people get excited about this. And I think one of the barriers, though, in the forestry profession, a college degree is required. I'm not sure that's necessary. And so I think that's a barrier we need to think about overcoming. When I say we as a profession need to think about overcoming. In fact, I was at the SAF meeting in Baltimore, and I think during a keynote, someone mentioned this point. And the Society of American Foresters crowd applauded when this person mentioned that maybe we don't need a college education to be certified to do a lot of these jobs. So I think that's something to think about as a group and a profession.
I wholeheartedly agree with that one, Rich. I'll say that we're in discussions with several community colleges who are really excited about working with us. Like, a lot of the work that we're talking about might just be a certificate program. And even better, and there are one or two models out there that we're looking at of earn while you learn, right? So you're going to school to get your certificate, but you're also being employed by a local nursery or landscape restoration company. So you're getting paid to do that, but potentially also getting paid to do your coursework. So really exciting opportunity there. Megan, to your question, we decided on an age range of 16 to 24, but we're also pretty flexible. That's our starting point. And we also largely let our hub leaders decide what's best for them. So we're this network, we want our hubs to have a fair amount of autonomy, how they work with their populations. They know what's best in their area. So our partners out in Howard County, Howard Eco Works, they have a number of different programs. They work with returning citizens, they work with youth. Yeah, there are a lot of people who could really benefit from this type of work and really enjoy it. And Rich, I agree with you on that one too. Truth be told, the reason I left graduate school, wildlife biologist, thought I wanted to go out and work in wild environments with rare, threatened, and endangered birds. And then I realized that as the planet gets increasingly urbanized, we become increasingly separated from nature. And that's really tragic, in my opinion. And so reintroducing nature into our urban environments and reintroducing people to that nature, it's awesome. Yeah, so many people get excited with just little patches of nature and realizing how much is out there. It's easy for them to forget for a moment about their phone in their pocket and just dive in and start looking at insects for a while, or a leaf or a bud scar, things like that.
A great point, and that experience really resonates with me. It is 2:00, so we want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I do just want to thank Ashley and Rich once again for lending us your time and for a great discussion today. Thank you. And Gary, any final comments?
You're muted.
Helpful if I actually take myself off silence. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you, Megan. I want to invite all of those who have joined us today, and will so in the future, we hope, because next month there'll be another Framing the Future webinar, and we'll be talking about the value and benefits of small green spaces in urban areas, something that frankly is not protected by law in the smart growth legislation here in Maryland. So it's an issue of ongoing concern for a great many stakeholders across the state. Join us next month for the research that helps identify and quantify what the value of these places are to the lifestyle and future of our urban spaces. Thank you very much today. And again, thank you to our panel. Have a good day.
Thanks all.